point, couldn't read. I've looked this up. Even in Western Europe, before the Renaissance, at best you're looking at about 20-25% of men could read. Women, you're looking at more like 10 or 15% at the time. But then you fast forward to the 18th to 19th centuries, we start having the Industrial Revolution, and out of that comes a very utopian idea, if you really think about it in hindsight. It's like, well, what if we take this academic learning and we make it free for everyone? We create mass public education. We want everyone to be able to read. We want everyone to be able to do algebra.
It was a radical idea at the time.
Hugely radical idea, and it's paid huge dividends. It's no coincidence that the first societies to invest here also ended up being the first societies that had a broad-based middle class. I'm thinking about Prussia, I'm thinking about the United States, I'm thinking about the UK, I'm thinking about Japan. They were the first societies to have mass public education, and they were the first to also have a broad middle class and also industrialize. And one led to the other. Industrialization led to more resources that you could put into education, and education led to better industrialization, better workforce. We had to make compromises, though. Even with the bounty of the Industrial Revolution, we still do not have the resources, and we still don't, to give every student an Aristotle, to give everyone a personal tutor. But in the Industrial Revolution, it said, well, okay, how do we produce things at scale? Well, we batch things together, we move them together to set pace on an assembly line, if you will.
Right.
We come up with some standards, we figure out some ways to assess the product according to those standards, and then maybe some of the product is going to be really high quality, and then that's going to go into one lane, and some of it, mid-quality, not quite sticking, that's going to go someplace else. We did the same thing in education. We batched kids together, usually by age, set standards. Let's say there's a test on exponents in 7th grade. You get a 90%, I get a 70%. Even though it identified gaps in both of our knowledge, the whole class moves on to the next concept, probably something that builds on those gaps. Some kids are going to be able to keep up, but other kids are starting to fall by the wayside. This is what I saw with my cousins. This is what we've seen in Khan Academy with now hundreds of millions of students, and we work with teachers in classrooms. Even though mass public education has done so much good, we still see that actually a majority of students aren't optimally served by this. A majority of kids who graduate from high school, actually who go to college in the United States, when they take an assessment at the college says you're not even ready to learn algebra yet. So even though they've taken all of these courses, the assembly line was moving them through courses like algebra and geometry and algebra 2. They go to college saying, hey, none of this was sticking. We're going to take you back to 7th grade. So there is a problem. Now, if I was saying this 50 years ago, you'd be like, well, we still don't have the resources to give everyone a personal tutor or to give every teacher a teaching assistant. But that's where technology maybe allows us to resolve this tension a bit.
And in the last 40 years, we've had this computing revolution. How much progress on solving this problem of improving upon the sort of factory model of education do you think we've made in the last 40 years? Do you think it's gotten much better or incrementally better?
It depends who you ask and who you're trying to serve. I think if you are a reasonably motivated learner who at least has some basic ingredients, you have an internet connection, you have a reasonable device, you're off to the races now. There's nothing to stop you from learning anything that you need to learn. So in the last 20 years, you do have a reality where whether it's Khan Academy or YouTube or other sources, obviously Khan Academy is much more than videos. We have exercises, we have teacher tools, but someone can methodically learn at their own pace. Or if they're in a classroom and something wasn't making sense, they can get that on-demand help to fill in that gap. And we are seeing, there's been over 50 efficacy studies on students using Khan Academy in classrooms, where teachers are able to let students go at their own pace. And those students are accelerating by 20, 30, 40%, depending on the research you look at. The problem is we don't still see that mainstream. And so in this next phase, I think artificial intelligence will allow us to go that much further. It'll allow us to support even more students. It'll allow us to support even teachers more than we were with pre-AI technology. But there's also going to be a lot of system change and professional development and other things we do to make sure that these tools get out there and they're used well.
So you've been making this case now for a long time. Your book, The One World Schoolhouse, came out 12 years ago. And you were making the case then that we need to help students learn at their own pace, fully master subjects before moving on to the next, teachers should be more mentors and facilitators, classes should be more interactive and less about delivering lectures. Now we finally have this tool in artificial intelligence, which is now also live on the Khan Academy platform in the form of Khanmigo, which I've been playing with. And I've decided I never quite grokked pre-calculus or calculus, so I've decided it's not too late. So I think I can. So I've signed up, and I'm in there. But you point out that Alexander the Great was tutored by Aristotle. Aristotle in turn was tutored by Plato, and Plato in turn was tutored by Socrates. Right? So there's some pretty impressive historical examples of tutoring. Do we have credible evidence today that one-on-one tutoring is the most effective way to learn? And it seems like a core thesis of your book is, if so, AI is going to deliver this on a massive scale.
I think we do, but I'll modify it slightly where I think it's more about personalization, whether it's one-on-one or not, which is being able to address exactly what the student needs in the moment. And I'll tell you the evidence that I anchor on. I gave a TED Talk a little over a year ago where I anchored on Benjamin Bloom's 2 Sigma study, where he made an argument that if you had one-on-one personalization in a mastery framework, which he defined as, hey, if a student hasn't learned something yet, they should be able to keep working on that. You only got 70% of exponents, keep working on basic exponents so that when you get to logarithms or negative exponents, things make a little bit more sense. What he was arguing is that you could get 2 standard deviation improvement. You could take a student who was performing in the 50th percentile, and with that type of personalized mastery learning, they could get to essentially the 95th or the 96th percentile. Or you can start with a student who's well below average and get to a student who's well above average. The other evidence is, I think this is intuitive. If you look at anyone who is great at what they're doing, you look at a great athlete, you look at a great musician, I don't think there is a great athlete that did not have some form of personalized one-on-one coaching. LeBron James did not become LeBron James purely based on genetics and talent. Someone would say, hey, you're really great at driving to the basket. You need to work on your three-pointers more. Or you need to work on your defense more. Let's do that right now. He wasn't sitting day after day listening to lectures about basketball in a group of 30 with people saying, okay, now let's everyone, for homework, practice your free throws. You're not going to get maximum results. Similar to any great musician, you will only learn that well is if you sit down. In fact, the standard practice of learning a musical instrument is to have a weekly one-on-one session with someone who's going to see where you're strong, where you're weak, going to give you feedback, and then say, go practice, and then come back the next week. So I think there's research evidence is strong, but I think even more obviously, the intuitive evidence is very strong. And I saw this also with my own cousins. That first cousin I was tutoring, Nadia, back in 2004, she was struggling in math. With a little bit of support, after 2 or 3 months, she became one of the top students in her class.
This, by the way, for listeners who aren't familiar with it, is the origin story of Khan Academy. That here you were, a young hedge fund analyst, right, and discovered that your cousin needed some help in math, and you got in there, and you wanted to share that.
No, that's exactly right. It was 2004, almost exactly 20 years ago. I was a year out of business school. I was in tech, but I now found myself as an analyst at a hedge fund. I had just gotten married. I was living in Boston, got married in New Jersey. My family from New Orleans, I was born and raised in New Orleans, was visiting me in Boston, and it came out of conversation. My 12-year-old cousin Nadia was having trouble in math. I offered to tutor her remotely. She agrees, and it works for her. She gets caught up with her class, a little ahead of her class. I joke, at that point I became a tiger cousin. I call up her school. I said she should be able to take that placement test from last year. They said, who are you? I said, I'm her cousin. They let her. And she became one of the top students in her class in math. So word spreads in my family. Free tutoring is going on. Before I know it, I'm tutoring 10, 15 cousins, family, friends. And I saw this pattern. The reason they were struggling wasn't because they didn't have access to great teachers or schools, wasn't because they weren't hardworking. It was because they had accumulated gaps in this traditional factory model where they're just being pushed ahead, or they might have forgotten some of the things that even when they did get an A the first time, they just forgot some of those skills. Then I saw that, hey, I was having to explain the same things over and over again. It was hard to schedule. I started making YouTube videos for my family. This was on a friend's suggestion. And my cousin's family told me they like me better on YouTube than in person. What they were saying, was they liked me being in their life as a coach, as a mentor, but it was really valuable to have an on-demand version right in the moment when they're doing their homework at 11 p.m. they could just access it. They didn't have to feel shame that they might have need review from something from elementary school. They could pause, repeat. It was infinitely patient. And so if you think about everything that Khan Academy's done since then, and Khan Academy is much more than me now. By 2008, there were on the order of 100,000 folks using it, and that's when I set it up as a nonprofit with the mission of free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. But ever since then, the reason why I thought free world-class education for anyone, anywhere isn't delusional is because there are now technological tools like the internet, like software, like on-demand video, and now AI that might allow us to scale the type of personalization that I was able to do at Nadia to hopefully hundreds of millions or billions of students. So that's to some degree our true north, and also provide tools to support teachers, because I still think they're a very important role here. To that point, that my cousins like the YouTube videos, but if I wasn't there mentoring them, they would have disengaged. So I think there's another very important role there of how do you also maximally inform and engage teachers in the process.
So you've been really focused on how we can use technology to improve education for a long time now. You've had a thesis about the importance of personalized learning at the right pace for a given student. You also, as we know, had this interest in college and beyond in artificial intelligence, and you get an incoming call from OpenAI, right? From I don't know if it was directly from Greg Brockman, but you ended up, I think, sitting down with Greg Brockman, a co-founder and president of OpenAI, to get an early peek at GPT-4, right? And they expressed an interest in partnering with you. What was that like the first time you saw GPT-4 and what it could do?
Yeah, and this was summer of 2022. It was an email from Sam Altman and Greg Brockman. They said, look, we are about to finish training our next model. We think this is a model that's going to really open people's eyes to what's possible with AI, and that's going to be both exciting and scary. And we want to lead, we OpenAI want to lead with social positive use cases from organizations that folks trust, with the technical capability to take advantage of it. And they said the first people we thought of was education and Khan Academy. And I was initially a little bit skeptical. I thought I had seen what GPT-2 and 3 were capable of. Very cool from a technological point of view, but still didn't seem like it could reason, so to speak, or could really make sense of the information. So it didn't seem ready for what we were doing at Khan Academy. But I was curious. We had that meeting. When I saw, and this was months before ChatGPT existed, and even ChatGPT, it's important to keep in mind, was based on an older model, not GPT-4. What they were showing me was GPT-4, and I think I might have been the first person outside of OpenAI to see it. I started getting chills because it was able to not just answer a question, it was able to explain why, and an AP level biology question, why that answer worked, why the other answer didn't work, and I started seeing that you could prompt it to really act as a strong Socratic tutor. It was obvious even then that it could be used for cheating, but what if you prompt the AI in the right way so it won't cheat and it can Socratically drive a conversation? And it wasn't hard to at least make it do that in a rough way. Now, there was issues. It still made a lot of math errors.
Hey, Sarah.